Dad told me. You're a failure, you embarrassed this family. After I dropped out of college, I packed my bags and said, watch me. Last week he showed up begging for. I still remember the weight of the suitcase handle digging into my palm as I walked down the front steps of the house I grew up in. My heart was beating so loud it almost drowned out my father's voice, still shouting behind me, words like bullets fired out into the cold night air. You're a failure! You embarrassed this family! I didn't flinch. I didn't even look back. I just tightened my grip, felt the leather bite into my skin, and said the only two words that mattered anymore. Watch me. It hadn't started that night, not really. The cracks had been forming for years. Tiny, almost invisible at first, until the whole foundation of our relationship just crumbled under the weight of expectations I never agreed to carry. My name's Evan Mitchell, by the way. I was supposed to be the next great success story. The Mitchell name was synonymous with achievement, after all. My father, Gregory Mitchell, a lawyer with a closet full of tailored suits and a shelf heavy with awards, had mapped my life out before I could even spell my own name. Doctor. Lawyer. Something prestigious enough to make him beam with pride at cocktail parties. And for a while, I tried. I really did. I enrolled at Westbridge University, not because I wanted to, but because it was what was expected. I chose pre-med, not because I loved it, but because love wasn't part of the equation. Only titles were. But the truth has a way of leaking out, doesn't it? A slow drip at first, until one day you're drowning in it. And for me, the first real sign of trouble came in the form of a grade report, a single letter printed in red ink next to organic chemistry. A D. The first crack. The first small betrayal of the life they'd scripted for me. I hid it at first, buried it under other papers, told myself it was just one slip-up. One mistake. But somewhere deep down, I knew, it was more than that. It was the beginning of a war I couldn't win, not on their battlefield, anyway. I thought I could hide it. Patch the crack with lies, with half-smiles at family dinners, with careful edits to my stories about school. I even started talking about internships I wasn't applying for, clubs I wasn't part of. Anything to keep the peace. But peace built on lies has an expiration date. It wasn't a test that broke the illusion. It wasn't a professor calling home or a letter from the university. It was something much smaller. Almost laughable, if you didn't know what was at stake. One night, while I was home for Thanksgiving, my father asked me to pull up my course schedule on his laptop. Said he wanted to help strategize my future, meaning control it, of course. I hesitated, just a beat too long. It was enough. He snatched the laptop from me, his eyes already narrowing. Within seconds he was clicking through tabs, his face growing redder by the minute. It didn't take long before he found what I had been hiding, a withdrawal slip from one of my core science classes, and an enrollment confirmation for a course in creative writing. Creative writing. A direct, blasphemous betrayal of everything the Mitchell family stood for. He slammed the laptop shut so hard it rattled the windows. "What is this?" he demanded, voice low, dangerous. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I say? That the hours I spent in that writing class were the only ones I didn't feel like I was suffocating? That sitting in front of a blank page made me feel alive in a way a stethoscope never would? He didn't wait for an answer. "You're throwing away your future for stories?" he barked, disgust dripping off every word. My mother, sweet, compliant, stayed silent, staring at her coffee like it had answers. My younger brother shifted uncomfortably in his chair. And me? I just sat there, drowning in the kind of shame that doesn't come from guilt, but from betrayal, theirs, not mine. That was the first real moment I realized something simple but devastating. It didn't matter who I really was. It only mattered who they wanted me to be. And if I refused to fit into their mold, I was disposable. The fallout wasn't immediate. At first, it was just silence. Days of stiff, formal conversations. Quick glances filled with quiet disappointment. The air in the house grew heavier with every passing hour, like a thunderstorm waiting to break. It happened the night before I was supposed to return to campus. I had been lying awake in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the words over and over in my head. How I would tell them. How I would finally cut the string tying me to a future I didn't want. But it didn't go the way I planned. It never does. At dinner, between bites of dry roast beef, I put my fork down and said, as calmly as I could, "I'm not going back." The room froze. My mother's hand hovered in the air, still holding her glass of water. My brother's fork clattered to his plate. And my father, he just stared at me, his eyes narrowing slowly, like a lion scenting weakness. "What did you say?" he asked, voice razor sharp. "I'm done," I said, feeling the tremble in my own voice. "I'm not going back to Westbridge. I've unenrolled." For a heartbeat, there was silence so deep I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. And then, he exploded. "You're a failure!" he roared, slamming his fist on the table so hard the plates jumped. "You embarrassed this family!" Spit flew from his mouth as he leaned across the table toward me, face red, veins bulging in his neck. "You think life is about chasing fairy tales? Writing your little stories?" he sneered. "You're nothing. You'll end up flipping burgers while your classmates build empires." My mother said nothing. My brother kept his eyes locked on his plate. It was like I had already ceased to exist in their world, like I wasn't even worth defending. For a second, just a second, I felt something inside me shatter. Something old. Something that had tried for too long to earn their approval. But right behind that pain came clarity. I stood up, slowly, deliberately, pushing my chair back without a word. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just walked upstairs, pulled out an old suitcase from under the bed, and started packing. There wasn't much to pack. Some clothes, a few worn notebooks, the battered laptop I'd scrimped months to buy. Everything else, the trophies, the framed certificates, the reminders of the life they had built for me, stayed right where they were. They didn't belong to me anymore. I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound loud and final in the heavy silence of my childhood bedroom. When I came back downstairs, my father was waiting in the hallway. Arms crossed. Jaw tight. The look of a man who had already written me off as dead weight. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said coldly. "You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back. And when you do, don't expect this door to open." I stood there for a second, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to fight for his love. I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't even need his anger. I adjusted my grip on my suitcase, opened the door, and turned to face him one last time. "Watch me," I said. Not angry. Not desperate. Just calm. Certain. Then I stepped outside, into the freezing night air, and let the door click shut behind me. I didn't look back. Not once. The cold bit into my skin, the suitcase bumped against my leg with every step, but I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, every breath, every choice, every failure and every triumph, they would be mine alone. No more second-hand dreams. No more living for applause that would never come. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was freedom. Freedom, it turns out, feels a lot like hunger when you're 20 years old with nowhere to sleep. The first night, I stayed in a crummy motel on the edge of town. $30 for a room that smelled like mildew and regret. I sat on the threadbare bed with my suitcase by my feet, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell I had just done. No safety net. No family. Just a little cash from a summer job, a half-charged phone, and a stubborn dream bigger than anything I could explain. Those first few months were brutal. I picked up shifts wherever I could, loading docks, coffee shops, landscaping in the dead heat of summer. I slept in the back seat of a used car I bought for $500 cash. I ate instant noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, whatever I could stretch out across a week. There were nights I wanted to give up. Nights I stared at my reflection in gas station bathroom mirrors, fighting the urge to call home, to hear some familiar voice. But I didn't. Not because I didn't miss them. Not because it didn't hurt. But because somewhere deep inside me, I understood that if I turned back now, I'd never get away again. I'd be trapped forever in their version of me, the failure, the embarrassment, the almost success who never quite measured up. So I stayed the course. Little by little, brick by brick, I built something real. I started taking freelance writing gigs, small ones at first. Product descriptions for shady websites, blog posts for companies no one had ever heard of. $50 here, $100 there. It was humiliating work sometimes, ghostwriting articles about topics I didn't understand or care about. But every time I got paid, no matter how small the check, it was mine. Earned with my own hands. My own mind. No father's name on the check. No expectations weighing it down. After a year, I was paying rent on a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. I had heat, running water, a second-hand couch. It wasn't much. But it was mine. And somewhere in all those long nights and lean days, the stories started to come alive. The real stories, the ones I wanted to tell. I wrote them in spiral notebooks, on bar napkins, on the back of receipts. Stories about struggle, about freedom, about standing up when the whole world tells you to sit down. Stories about kids who walked away from everything they knew, and built something better. By the third year, something unbelievable happened. One of those stories sold. An online magazine paid me $300 for a short story about a boy who burned every bridge he had in order to light his own way. And then another magazine paid me. And another. Before I knew it, I wasn't just scraping by. I was living. I was thriving. Not by anyone else's standards, maybe. I didn't have a white coat. I didn't have a corner office. But I had something better. I had myself. Success didn't come all at once. It came in whispers. A check that covered more than just rent. An email from a publisher asking if I had anything longer. An invitation to speak at a local writers' event, me, the dropout, standing at a podium under bright lights. And for the first time, people didn't see a disappointment when they looked at me. They saw a storyteller. A man who had something to say. Something worth hearing. By the time I turned 26, I had published my first novel. It wasn't a bestseller. It didn't make me rich. But it made me proud. Every word in that book was a piece of the road I had crawled across to get here. And through it all, I never once heard from my family. No angry calls. No bitter letters. No apologies. It was like they had erased me from the family tree, and honestly, I thought I was fine with that. Some ghosts are better left haunting empty houses you never have to walk through again. Until last week. It was a Thursday, late afternoon. I was home, sitting at my kitchen table with a coffee growing cold beside me, sketching out notes for a new project. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. At first, I thought it was a delivery. I opened the door, and there he was. My father. Older. Smaller somehow. His once imposing figure now bent, like a tree that had weathered too many storms. His hair was thinner, his skin grayer, the sharpness in his eyes dulled into something I didn't immediately recognize. It wasn't authority. It wasn't power. It was desperation. "Evan," he said, voice cracking around my name. "Son, I need your help." I just stood there, the air between us thick and heavy. I felt nothing. Not hatred. Not rage. Not even pity. Only a strange, cold sense of distance, like I was looking at a stranger on the street, not the man who once screamed that I was an embarrassment. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The wind stirred the leaves on the porch, and the world around us went on. Distant traffic, a dog barking down the street, the smell of rain in the air. Everything so normal. And yet this moment felt heavy. Final. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "What do you want, Dad?" I said it flatly, like asking a neighbor why they were knocking at midnight. He swallowed hard. His hands trembled as he fidgeted with the hem of his jacket, a nervous habit I didn't remember from before. "I'm not well," he said finally. "Health problems. Money's gone. The house is gone. Your mother, she left." He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw it. The absence of pride. The shell of a man who had built his whole life around being admired, and now had no one left to admire him. "I have nowhere else to go," he said, voice small, breaking. I thought maybe you could help me out. Just until I get back on my feet." I studied him carefully. There was a time, not so long ago, when those words would have gutted me. When I would have scrambled to do anything he asked, just to earn a crumb of approval. But standing there now, all I felt was a quiet certainty. I owed him nothing. Not forgiveness. Not shelter. Not a second chance. He had made his choices long ago, choices that built a wall between us so high and so thick that now there was no door left to open. I straightened, feeling the coldness settle in my bones, not anger, not revenge. Just peace. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said calmly. "But you made it clear a long time ago that I was never part of this family. You don't get to rewrite that now because it's convenient." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. For the first time, he had no lecture. No threats. Only silence. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, stepping back and gently pushing the door closed between us. There was a soft thud as it latched. And just like that, he was gone. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, listening to nothing. No shouting. No pleading. No banging on the wood. Just the distant hum of life continuing outside, a life I had built, brick by brick, without him. I moved back to the kitchen, picked up my now cold coffee, and stared out the window, half expecting to see him still standing there, some desperate figure frozen in the rain. But he was gone. And in his place, I felt something I hadn't known I was missing. Relief. Not the adrenaline-fueled kind you get when you barely escape a disaster. Not the vindictive satisfaction of seeing someone get what they deserve. No, it was quieter than that. Purer. It was the feeling of being done. Truly, finally done. For so long, my life had been a slow, silent negotiation with ghosts, trying to prove something to a man who never really wanted to understand me. Trying to earn love from people who had attached conditions to every ounce of it. But now, the chains were gone. I thought maybe guilt would creep in. That somewhere in the quiet hours of the night, I'd wonder if I had been too cold, too harsh. But the guilt never came. Instead, the memories did. All the times he told me I wasn't good enough. All the times he measured my worth by titles, trophies, bank balances. All the nights I lay awake wondering if I would ever be enough for him. All the sacrifices I made, not because I wanted to, but because I thought maybe this time he'd finally say he was proud of me. I thought about that boy. The one who used to stay up late studying, not because he loved chemistry, but because he thought good grades would buy him love. I thought about the boy who packed his suitcase with trembling hands, not sure where he was going, only certain he couldn't stay. And now, sitting at my own table, in my own home, surrounded by work that was mine, built on my own stubborn dreams, I realized something simple and beautiful. I didn't owe my father salvation. I didn't owe him closure. I didn't owe him anything. Some people will tell you blood is everything. That family deserves endless chances simply because they share your last name. But that's a lie. Respect is earned. Love is nurtured. Family isn't built on blood, it's built on trust, kindness, loyalty. He broke those bonds long ago. He just never thought he'd have to live with the consequences. But now he would. Alone. And me? I would go on living. Not for revenge. Not for spite. But because I had finally learned how to live for myself. In the days that followed, I thought there would be some echo of him, some lingering shadow in the corners of my life. Maybe an unexpected voicemail. Maybe a letter. Maybe a friend or old family acquaintance calling, trying to guilt me back into the story I had finally written myself out of. But there was nothing. Just silence. And in that silence, I found a kind of peace I'd never known growing up. Mornings were quieter. Coffee tasted better. My shoulders felt lighter, as if I had been carrying an invisible backpack full of stones for years without even realizing it. I went back to my writing, to my work, to the life I had fought for, but it all felt different now. Like I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I wasn't trying to outrun the past. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just living. And for the first time, I understood something I wish someone had told me years ago. Walking away doesn't make you cruel. Closing the door on people who hurt you, even if they share your blood, doesn't make you cold-hearted. It makes you free. There's a narrative we're fed, one I grew up hearing, that family means unconditional loyalty. That no matter what they do, you stay. That being a good son, or a good daughter, or a good sibling, means absorbing every blow, swallowing every insult, forgiving every betrayal. But here's what they don't tell you. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep anyone else warm. Not your father. Not your mother. Not your siblings. Not anyone. When someone weaponizes love against you, when they use obligation to chain you to their cruelty, that's not love. That's control. And you don't owe control anything. Not a second chance. Not an apology. Not your life. I didn't walk away from my father because I hated him. I didn't even walk away because he was weak or broken in the end. I walked away because I refused to spend one more second sacrificing my peace for a man who only loved the idea of me, not the reality. I had earned my life. I had fought tooth and nail for every small piece of it. And I wasn't giving it back to a ghost. Not now. Not ever.